Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, the only public opinion pollster spreading conspiracy theory vaccine propaganda. Now, we are going to be talking about the COVID vaccines today, but I wanted to take a moment to make a quick pitch to please follow us on YouTube or Rumble. Click that subscribe button. We're the only place pretty much that I can think of on YouTube talking about public opinion that's recently been cited by former President Donald Trump.
We had great polls that just came out. Rasmussen, one of the most respected pollsters, has us 10 points above crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in history.
Here's a tweet from last Friday. And what he's talking about is our most recent, absolutely insane 2024 matchup numbers that show that right now, according to our polling, Donald Trump is up a stunning 9 points over Joe Biden in a two-way race. And in the multi-way matchup, Donald Trump's leading by double digits, 10 points. Now, here's the thumbnail, and you could go check that YouTube video out yourself. But I want to get into vaccines. Now, if you've been following us, you probably knew this video was coming. And you also probably know that we've uncovered some really horrifying numbers about the COVID vaccines. Here's a quick rundown. According to our polling, out of their own mouths, 41% of Americans who took a vaccine said they had at least a minor side effect, and 7% of them said a major side effect. Nearly half of Americans say it's at least somewhat likely that the COVID vaccines are causing a significant number of unexplained deaths. Just as many people say that someone in their family died from the COVID vaccine as died from the COVID virus. And then most recently, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 Americans say they know someone personally who died from side effects of the COVID vaccines. Now, we had to go back into the field with some new vaccine questions, specifically because a few ignorant trolls on Twitter, and of course, our favorite fact-checking stalker fan, Glenn Kessler from the Washington Post, they gave us some good ideas for new questions to ask. Now, in a previous video, this one here with Fauci on the cover, we actually addressed all of their pretty stupid and baseless accusations. And I'm not going to go through all of it now, but it basically boils down to this. When we have a poll where, let's just say, 19% of Americans know someone personally they think died from the COVID vaccine side effects, there's really only a couple of simple, logical possibilities. One is that we're just complete liars, and you're watching our channel. I don't think you think that's the case. Two is that maybe our polling is just terribly inaccurate. Now, I will say we've built a track record of predicting elections incredibly accurately, and even their own gatekeeping organization, 538, ranked us as one of the most accurate pollsters in the 2020 cycle. But when people talk about polling and accuracy, usually they're raking people over the coals for missing by 2 or 3 points. We're talking about 19%. 19% of Americans in a poll that had a margin of error of 3%. So let's just say instead of 19 that the real number was 10%. Now, that would be 3 times outside the margin of error. And so, therefore, basically statistically impossible. But even if it was 10%, that implies that 25 million-ish Americans think they know someone that they think died from the COVID vaccines. Now, what are the implications of that? Well, are those people, are they idiots or are they misinformed? It doesn't matter because it creates a problem for government, for the medical industry, for the pharmaceutical giants, and yes, maybe even for public health. Those people think the vaccines are killing people. The only appropriate response when someone like us comes out with numbers like that is to realize there's a big problem and invest heavily in new surveys or in new scientific studies. Go ahead, prove us wrong. We beg of you. But you know what? Not a single one of them has. Not a single one of them is going to even attempt to prove us wrong. It only costs a couple $1,000s to poll the country. Any one of them could have done it 1,000,000 times. Heck, Morning Consult spent tens of millions of dollars just to know how many Americans were vaccinated. But the real problem is that some interesting stuff is going to start to come out. And these people, I personally think, are on the wrong side of this issue. Stuff like this peer review study here that just hit a major scientific paper, and then this story here out of Just the News and John Solomon's paper. It looks like maybe the government and the medical industry wasn't very forthcoming with all of the vaccine averse events data. But anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked. Let's get on to today's numbers. And we're shifting back into Excel. Sorry, people didn't like on the slides that I couldn't highlight the numbers as I spoke. But in regards to getting vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus, which of the following best describes you? No vaccines, 25%. One vaccine, 14%. More than one vaccine, 20%. And then, fully vaccinated, took the vaccines plus one or more boosters, 38%. Add them up, you get 72%, which is, pretty much in the range we've been seeing of 68% to low 70s. Maybe the fact that we broke it out like this made people less forgetful about taking vaccines. Now, younger Americans were the least vaccinated cohort. I think that makes sense. 65 and older Americans, the most vaccinated at a stunning 81% rate. 86% of Democrats took at least one vaccine, but as did 58% of Republicans and 71% of independents. So those numbers basically check out with everything we've been seeing. But, we have a whole lot of demographic crosstabs every time we put polls out, and I pick and choose which ones to show here. I thought it would be interesting to take a look at education. People with no high school diploma got 57% of them got at least one vaccine. Only 22% got the boosters. But look at those grad school people. 56% got boosted, and a combined total of 87% got at least one COVID vaccine. Good job, guys. But of the 880 adults in this survey who received at least one COVID vaccine, do you regret taking a COVID vaccine? 24% of vaccinated Americans say yes, 69% say no, 6% are not sure. 24, I don't know. Maybe you think that's a small number. I'm telling you right now, that's a really big number. If you take 72% of adults being vaccinated and then multiply that by 24%, pretty sure that gives you 45 million people. Middle-aged Americans had the most COVID regret, 27%, only 66% of them say no. And here's what's interesting. Even 14% of vaccinated Democrats regret taking the vaccine, although 39% of Republicans do, strong. But 50% of Republicans say no. And independents are somewhere in the middle, basically 26% to 66%. Now, I thought this was interesting to include as well. It looks like vaccine regret was one of the reasons that people didn't get more vaccinated. Maybe the health industry could have been, polling these questions and responding to people's concerns. But people who got only one vaccine, 43% regret having that single shot. People who had more than one, it drops to 38. But those booster people, that's what separates this signal. Only 10% of boosted people say they regret taking the COVID vaccine, but 86% of them say no. That's a really large number. But as I frame this in the intro, what we're talking about is an issue of trust. Ideally, when asked, how much trust do you now have for the medical and pharmaceutical industries, 100% of Americans would say a lot of trust. That's the goal. That's the number we should see. But unfortunately, only 17% of Americans say they have a lot of trust for the medical and pharmaceutical industries. 37% say some trust, and the combined total there is 54%. So a majority have, at least some trust. 25% not much trust, and 18% no trust at all, for a combined total of 43% who say they don't have trust. That's not good. I mean, at some point, basically everybody in our country is going to have to trust the medical and pharmaceutical industry for something, right? Democrats have a lot more trust than other people. Combine that, that's 71% have at least some trust. Only 28%, have no trust. But only 8% of Republicans have a lot of trust for the medical and pharmaceutical industry. Now, if you're watching this and you work in politics on a Republican campaign, you should pay attention to that number. Your voters are telling you something very important right here. Things that should be probably part of your platform. Now, 30% of Republicans do say they have some trust, but a combined total of 61% say they have no trust. And independents, I guess you'd say this is in the middle on this one. 51%, a majority, have at least some trust, but only 15% have a lot of trust. And I'm telling you, those numbers are just really low. And they're being driven down by people who had not just 0 vaccines, but also 1 vaccine. The numbers here for a lot of trust are 7% and 10% respectively. For no vaccine, 30% combined, at least some trust, but 41% for the 1 vaccine, folks. So those numbers are low. But look at the boosted people. Even the boosted people, 28% of them, only 28% of boosted Americans have a lot of trust in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. Wrap your head around that. Now, add some trust, you get to 80%. But the last question here, do you agree or disagree with this statement about COVID-19 vaccines? And we thank Dr. Peter McCullough for giving us the quote we used in this question. Do you agree or disagree the vaccine is killing people and is killing large numbers of people? This is by far the highest bar we've put in a vaccine, agree or disagree question. So we expect the numbers to be low here. And are they? I don't know. 16% of Americans strongly agree with that statement. Another 17% somewhat agree, for a combined total of 33%, or 1 in 3 Americans agree that the vaccine is killing large numbers of people. Only 39% strongly disagree, and only 57% at least somewhat disagree. Crazy numbers. And what's fascinating to me is the people who most strongly agree by age are the younger Americans, 18 to 39-year-olds. 38%, at least somewhat agree. 20% strongly agree. But by party, 18% of Democrats agree with that statement, but it's also 52% of Republicans and another 30% of independents. So Republicans agree most, but there are pretty significant numbers of Democrats and independents who agree. Now, again, by how vaccinated people are, likely the reason these people are starting to have vaccine regret. 64% of non-vaccinated Americans, at least someone agree with that statement, but also 38% of Americans who had just 1 vaccine. And of course, it's the booster people who really, 85% of them disagree, 75% strongly. So it's pretty sad to see what these last 3 years have done to trust. Now, specifically the medical and pharmaceutical industries, but I'm here to tell you that trust in pretty much every institution absolutely plunged during the last 3 to 4 years. Trust in the rule of law, trust in our federal agencies, trust in the media, even trust in our elections. It's really bad. They're at an all-time low. Now, 66% of U.S. likely voters think it's at least somewhat likely that cheating is going to affect the outcome of the 2024 elections. And for the first time, a majority of both Democrats and independents agree with Republicans on that issue. But anyways, about the medical industry, if I was part of the medical blob, I would try to restore trust. These are people that spend tens of billions of dollars a year trying to earn the trust of Americans. They've tried gaslighting and censorship, and it doesn't work. Time to maybe come clean, or maybe use some of that money, to put into studies, prove Americans wrong, prove conclusively the vaccines are safe. Go ahead. Now, I promised to tell you this story about our fun little trolls on Twitter. And we had an article written about us last week by the esteemed Michael Hitzlick of the Los Angeles Times. In his column, this GOP-leaning political polling firm has turned into a purveyor of anti-vaccine propaganda. Now, first, we are not affiliated with anybody. We're trying to be accurate, and as such, if we think we have a lean, we try and get rid of it. But finally, it's Rich calling us propaganda when all we're doing is literally giving Americans, people like you watching this video, a voice, because it seems like people like Michael Hitzlick don't want you to hit. No, I'm not subscribing. Get out of here. But anyways, I'm not going to read this whole thing. Go find it yourself. But something has happened to Rasmussen in recent years. Our results have become more sharply partisan, even though we called 2020 within the margin of error with the final national popular vote, whatever. But it's increasingly promoted right-wing conspiracy theories on topics such as race relations, election results, and perhaps most troubling, COVID vaccines and COVID origins. I have to tell you, in all of our numbers, Democrats also, it's less of a signal than Republicans, but Democrats have these concerns as well. Early this month, Rasmussen tweeted the results of polls it conducted, claiming to find that 1 in 5 Americans believe they know someone who died from COVID vaccine. I think that's newsworthy. There are many reasons, this is where it gets good. There are many reasons to disregard any such poll, asking people what they think about a scientifically validated fact. So what are those reasons? Why didn't you write them? Please, we're all ears. I want to hear what reasons you have. But in any case, that records show that overwhelmingly the COVID vaccines widely used in the US are safe and effective. So the reason we shouldn't be asking these questions is because the government that nobody trusts say the vaccines are safe and effective. Case closed. And they're the ones calling us propaganda. I find that rich. Now, the real issue here is that, he's clutching pearls because I think quite validly, we projected the possible number of people that would have possibly died if our numbers were borne out to, be validated by, again, the scientific industry who's totally turning a blind eye. But, I don't think they liked the fact that I compared it to something that happened in Nazi Germany. And maybe that's why he wrote this article, or maybe he just got a tap on his shoulder from the editing room. But whatever, it isn't a very good article. But what it did inspire us to do was make this Twitter poll. LA Times and Michael Hitzlick don't like that we had the audacity to ask you Americans about your experiences with the vaccine. Would you be more likely or less likely to read the LA Times if they polled the same questions as us? They probably have in-house pollsters that could do this for a really cut rate. And, I think, the problem is LA Times is hemorrhaging readers left and right. And 65% of our respondents say they'd never read the LA Times, but by an 8-to-1 margin, people say they'd be more likely to read the LA Times if they polled the same questions as us. And why is that? It's because our polling is newsworthy. Now, I went and added on like, hey, some people haven't been following us, and here's what the questions were. And then we got a response by this guy. I guess it's because we tagged him. It's not your asking the questions. It's platforming anti-vaccine stuff that makes you grossly irresponsible. Try to be responsible for once. So this is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who writes for one of the biggest papers in the US. And the best he can come up with is to say that we're irresponsible by literally just asking Americans about concerns they have and then reporting it so that you can read it. Now, I think we had a really great response to him. Define, anti-vaccine. I have kids that watch these. It sounds like you have strong opinions, but don't want the results of our accurate national surveying of other American adults to be shared because they indicate grossly irresponsible actions by authorities. So basically what it looks like it comes down to is these elitists think they're above you and that your opinion doesn't matter. But here at Rasmussen Reports, we do think your opinion matters, and we're going to keep asking you about it. And while you're at it, please like the video. And if you have any ideas for questions you'd like us to put in the field, post them in the YouTube comments and I'll take a look. Follow us on Twitter so you don't miss all of our new stories. You can subscribe if you want to read them. They come out on a daily basis. You can also hit me up at Twitter at Mark_R_Mitchell. And thanks for watching.